This short presentation seeks to provide the context for Genesis chapter 2. Without a context, it is very difficult for us to read Genesis chapter 2 with the understanding as the writer intended to communicate to us. So context is very important, and in this presentation, I'm suggesting a Neolithic context for Genesis chapter 2. Now inside Genesis chapter 2, there are clues that we can draw and come to paint the context for Genesis chapter 2. For example, Genesis chapter 2 verse 15, then the Lord God took the man and put him in the garden of Eden to tend and to keep it. Now the phrase to tend and to keep it in the garden suggested farming. So basically, the word to tend and to keep is where we got our origin and the meaning of the word culture. Culture, in its original meaning, means the tilting of land, the act of preparing the earth for crops, and it comes from the Latin word cultura, which we get our English words now, words like horticulture, agriculture, epiculture, aquaculture, etc. Now, in this slide, we have a visual of a human society. Humankind have progressed from hunter-gatherer type of life where they have to wander and seek or chase after the food supply. But here in the Neolithic age, man begin to cultivate the land, plant crops. They are able to domesticate the animals, and they basically settle down permanently and develop their lives. And rivers are very important. Primary source will be fishing, and from the crops they plant, and from the cattle they kept. So as humankind begin to settle down on a permanent basis, community begin to build, and the men begin to develop skill, tools, and even some rules and regulations to keep things in order. And in Genesis chapter 2, verse 19, we can also find clue regarding domestications of cattle in the Neolithic age context. In verse 19, out of the ground the Lord God formed every beast of the field and every bird of the air and brought them to Adam to see what he would call them. And whatever Adam called each living creature, that was his name. So man began to call animals and in category terms. They are all noun. Like for example, dog, cats, cow, chicken. They are all in category terms noun. Also in Genesis chapter 2, we find words like land, which God uh, raised up from the sea of unstable, of chaos. Land signifies stability. And out of land, you have Eden, which is a geographical terrain that is delightful, that is suitable, that's not rocky, that's not mountainous, but it is delightful for human to settle down. And in this delightful terrain, there is a place basically garden, which is fertile, which is fruitful, which is able to sustain humans' settlement. Now there are several pointers we can take note of from Genesis chapter 2. Basically, firstly, in this presentation, we are not focusing on the theological disclosure, but providing a context, a geographical context of human um, society in the background, what is the geographical context, and from there we gain an understanding how this theological message is being conveyed. So basically in Genesis chapter 2, we note certain pointers. First, there's a garden which is fruitful, fertile location in Eden, a delightful, suitable geographical terrain. And there's also a river. Rivers are very important for human settlement. First, yeah, they provide irrigation for the crops, watering of the cattle they domesticated, and for their own drinking. And the land also contains natural resources of metal ore, gold, and many others. And we can see from the Neolithic age, mankind will progress to the Metal Age. And there's also a few pointers we note about the humankind themselves. First, the humankind is still progressively civilized. You notice uh, the noun that has been used in chapter 2, right? And it suggests a standard of civic, suggesting the progression from Paleolithic time to the Neolithic time, a progression from hunter-gatherer society to the agrarian society. Now, as far as the now category, it denotes progressions of relationship. You notice that in Genesis 1:1, the word for God is Elohim, basically spirit, and it progressed to Genesis 2:5, and it is now Lord God, and eventually to Yahweh in Genesis 4:1. So there's a progression of relational aspect. And also notice in Genesis chapter 2, the noun word of categorical terms like man and woman were used. You find that man called his life partner woman. Now I was in China in the early 90s and I noticed that the people would not introduce their wife as their darling or their sweetheart, but they will just introduce that this is my woman. So you can be, it's quite surprisingly, even in the early 90s, China are still practicing this, right? So another point that we have to note is humankind are still simpleton. In Genesis chapter 2, verse 25, they were both naked and ashamed. Now, the writer of Genesis uses a palm to contrast the deceptive nature of the Nakash, which is the serpent or the watcher, uh, with the innocence of the man and the woman to connect Genesis chapter 2 to Genesis chapter 3. Right? That's basically the literal techniques, the writer techniques in how he do his storytelling. Now, the Hebrew words used, the biblical Hebrew words used, is like that. The man and the woman were arum, but not ashamed, and the serpent was arum out of all the beasts of the field. So you notice that the writer will use similarly phrase or sound words to produce an emphasis or to catch the original audience attention that it sounds and there is something suggestive that they have to pay attention to. Now there are many resources in the internet and in YouTube. I provided 3 here. Please watch and let us all have a better understanding of what is life is like in the earlier human stage, and so they provide a better context of how we read the Bible. Thank you.